Hello, this is Mr. Davis, and these are the Style Pile Notes. These notes are a series of lessons that are designed to help writers add sentence variety and style to their writing so that we can go beyond simple sentences such as, my dog ran, to more complicated and stylish structures like, my dog, the beautiful, courageous pug, ran hideously slow. These lessons are brief, free of overly complicated grammar jargon, and should be accessible for all learners. So, what do you need to do these Style Pile Notes? If you're in my class, ask for a copy, or if you're not in my class, print a copy of the Style Pile Notes. Here's how it works. Watch the lessons while filling in your notes. You only need the parts that are in red font. If you want to take down more notes than what's in the red font, you're free to do so. Okay, so today's Style Pile Notes are going to focus on starting with a subordinate clause. First box on your notes says, what is it? You're going to put starting with a subordinate clause. Okay, let's go over now the rules and examples. Rule number 1, use one of the words from the list to start your subordinate clause. That list is posted on my website right above the video itself. Rule number 2 is it must be followed by a comma. Rule number 3, the second part must complete the idea. So let's take a look at this example on the bottom. After, that follows rule number 1. It's one of the words from the list. Again, that's posted on my website for you to download and print. Rule number 2, it must be followed by a comma. So after he ran inside, comma. Rule number 3, the second part must complete the idea. So after we ran inside, Mr. Davis hugged his handsome, spit-up covered son. And that's true because most of the time I'm hugging him, he's spit-up covered. So after we ran inside, well, what happened after we ran inside? And then that second part completes the idea. So we've got rules number 2 and 3 followed as well. If you're not sure on my website where to find that document, if you look right above the video, it'll have this sheet right here for you to download and print. So I have a question for you. Is this correct based on the 3 rules we just learned? Does this sentence start with a subordinate clause correctly? I'd like you to pause the video for a moment and think to yourself, is this correct? Okay, hopefully you took a moment to pause the video and kind of think to yourself, did this use a subordinate clause correctly? It actually did use a subordinate clause correctly. And if you're not sure why, let's go over our 3 rules. First rule is it has to start with one of the rules from the list. Even though is a word from that list. I know it's 2 words, but we'll just say a word from that list, so we're good to go with rule number 1. Rule number 2, it has to be followed by a comma. So even though Amy sneezed all over the tuna salad, and then we've got this comma right here, we've got rule number 2 followed. Rule number 3, the second part has to complete the idea. So even though Amy sneezed all over the tuna salad, Jarrett still ate it. That second part completes the idea. It's kind of a gross idea, but I don't know what's wrong with Jared. He's still eating the tuna salad. Well, tuna salad's kind of gross anyways, but to eat it after someone sneezes on it, right? Well, that second part completes the idea. It follows all 3 rules, so therefore it used the subordinate clause correctly. Okay, this time I'm going to ask you what is wrong with this example. There is something wrong with it. I'd like you to pause the video for a moment, look it over, think about your 3 rules and decide what is wrong with this example. Alright, let's take a look at our 3 rules to find out what is wrong with this example. Rule number 1 says you have to use one of the words from the list. Even though, again, that's 2 words, but that is from our list, so it follows rule number 1. Rule number 2, it must be followed by a comma. Well, if you look at this whole sentence, there's not one single comma, so we're breaking rule number 2 right off the bat. Rule number 3, the second part must complete the idea. Well, when we read this sentence, even though Amy wasn't there, well, what happened? Even though Amy wasn't there, so what? What happened, right? It does not complete the second part, it doesn't have a completion of the idea, so therefore it does not use the subordinate clause correctly. All right, if you're confused a little bit, let me ask you a different question. Does this fix the problem? So I've taken that same sentence. I'd like you to pause the video for a moment and think to yourself, does this fix the problem? Look at your 3 rules and look at this example. So, if you said that this did fix the problem, guess what? You're wrong, because there is still a mistake here. It broke one of our 3 rules. Let's go through them really quick. First rule, must use one of the words from the list. Well, we said last time even though was from the list, so good. Rule number 1 is good. Rule number 2, it has to be followed by a comma. Even though Amy wasn't there, what the heck is this? That's not a comma, that's a semicolon. Remember what we learned about semicolons. They join 2 complete ideas that are related to each other. Even though Amy wasn't there, that's not a complete idea, so we can't have a semicolon there. We're supposed to have a comma. So let's cross this guy out. Boom, we'll put our comma there. Rule number 3, the second part has to complete the idea. So if we change out that semicolon, it reads, even though Amy wasn't there, comma, we ate the salad in her memory. Well, that second part completes the idea. We've got all 3 rules followed at this point. With that small change from a semicolon to a comma, we're now using the subordinate clause correct. Lee. All right, now to that third and final box of your notes, the use it box. I want you to tell me about your favorite TV show or movie using a subordinate clause at the start of your sentence to do so. Pause the video for a moment and go ahead and fill in your use it box. Okay, here's my example. Again, yours might be a little bit different from mine, which is fine. I started with even though. I've got a lot starting with even though. Even though, so that's rule number 1, there can be too much talking at times. Rule number 2, it's followed by a comma. Now we got to check rule number 3 that this completes my idea. So even though there can be too much talking at times, The Walking Dead is one of my favorite shows. That does complete the idea. I followed all 3 rules. I want you to look in your use it box. Check to make sure you followed all 3 rules. If you're not sure, call your teacher on over to have them give it a check just to make sure you started your sentence with the subordinate clause correctly. Here are some more examples in case you want to see a few more. This first one is absolutely true, by the way. If you didn't know this, check it. Put your foot next to your elbow and your wrist and you'll be surprised. The second example is here for you to look at as well, so you can kind of see some different examples of how to start sentences with subordinate clauses. Alright, your job now, add subordinate clauses to the start of your sentences to add style and flair to your writing. While adding subordinate clauses to the start of your sentences can be cool, don't overdo it. It's like putting too much frosting on a cake. If every single sentence starts with a subordinate clause, it's going to get tiring real fast. Thank you for using these videos. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask your teacher.